We will begin our formal course from today, and in the first 1 week we will take it slow. I usually start it on a slow pace, introduce you to the subject through some videos, some tribal ethnographies, and then slowly we will pick it up over the next week. So in the first 2-3 classes, we will first watch some videos, because as I understand, most of you are from non-anthropology background, right? Is anybody here who's already done anthropology? Nobody. And to most of you, anthropology, you must not have heard about this subject until you got into civil services examination, right? Was there anybody here who knew about anthropology right from their graduation? No. So, if I directly pull you into the discussion and the academic content right away, you will have difficulty in understanding what you are studying first, isn't it? It will be a repeat of your degree in engineering, where you chose something without knowing what you chose, and then by the time you understood it, you finished the course, isn't it? That is why you are all here, because you didn't really enjoy your engineering a lot. So that is why we will take it slow. I want you to first develop an imagination. Remember, if you are there in my workshop on Friday, I believe that students are natural learners. Do I have to tell you to go and watch a movie? Should I develop the curiosity in you? Should someone tell you to go and watch a particular movie? Not really, right? When you have curiosity, you tend to read, learn on your own. So I believe that you are all natural learners, and the objective of any teacher must be to stimulate that curiosity, stimulate that interest in you. Once that interest and curiosity is triggered in you, I believe, even without my pushing you, you will read and learn on your own. In fact, if you reflect on your learning curve throughout your life so far, wherever you developed curiosity, you would have really liked learning things. Wherever your parents, friends or relatives pushed you, you must have done something for the time being, but you not really enjoyed it and not really learnt much out of it. Is it not so? So, throughout my course, the approach I will take is to do that. That is to develop interest first. You must first develop interest. You must learn to enjoy what you are learning. It shouldn't be that I paid the fee, I have chose the subject, so I have to be here from 2:30 to 4, 2 to 4, whatever. You should feel the passion to be here, to learn, to understand all these new concepts. So as part of that, today on Friday I showed a video of Chenchus. Since as I see, how many of you are there on Friday? Subramanya was there. 2. Mamata, you were there on Friday, workshop, online. Yes, anybody else were there on workshop? Yes, so only 4 people. So on Friday we watched a video of one tribal people, Chenchu. So today we will watch 2 more videos and we will discuss after each. Why this is important? Because in anthropology, one of the central focus of anthropology is tribal people. So a lot of our discussion in anthropology will be on tribal people. Who are tribal people? Who are these tribal people? Yes? Away from the, where do they live? Forests. Good, very good. They live in forests, and usually forests and tribes. But do all of them, is it necessary that all the so-called scheduled tribes live in forest? No? Do you know of any scheduled tribe which is not living in the forest? Did you hear about a community called Lambada or called Banjaras as well? Yes? Do they live in forests? No. So in general, yes, most of them live in forests and hilly areas. So where do you find the scheduled tribal people in AP, Telangana, in the Telugu states? Where do you find them? Yes? Where do you find them? Nallamala forest, very good. Where else? Who do you find in Nallamala forest? Chenchus. Where else? Nallamala forest is one region where you find them. Then? Dandakaranya, is it in AP? Yes, most of Dandakaranya region is in Chhattisgarh. That is also, in fact, in central India, you find many tribal people in Dandakaranya region or the so-called Bastar region. But let us first stick to AP, Telangana, the two Telugu states. So in Nallamala you find some tribals. Where else? Adilabad. Yes? In Adilabad, do you see a lot of tribal people? Yes or no? Yes. In Adilabad, who do we see? Gonds. In Adilabad, you have the Gond tribal people. Who else? Where else do you see tribal people in AP? Nallamala we finished. Where else? Vizianagaram. Yes, you also see them in starting from where are Eastern Ghats in AP? First, you told me tribals are there in forests and hills. So, how should you logically think? You should search for forests in AP. Where are forests in AP and Telangana? Adilabad has forests. Then, in AP, where is the forest area? Yes? Seshachalam, yes. But there you don't have tribals because it is the holy shrine. So you have very few tribal people there. But do you have Eastern Ghats in AP? Along Vizag, Srikakulam, Vijayanagaram, do you have some hills there? There is a famous hill station, right? Araku. Do you have tribals there? Yes. And that hilly area stretches all the way till East and West Godavari district, till Godavari river. Do you have tribals in Godavari districts? No? Yes? No? Yes or no? Yes. Where do you have tribals in Godavari district? So West and East Godavari are very unique in their geographical division. On one side you have the hilly region, on the other side is the delta. So the hilly region is completely dominated by tribal people. The plain region starting from Rajamandri and downstream of Godavari is all densely populated delta. That is where you have your rice bowl and the famed Konasima. But further north, further upstream from Rajamandri is all hilly region. You might have gone for some vacation, some trips, Papikondalu, Bhadrachalam. This is all hilly area, right? So there again you have a lot of tribal people, Koyas, Konda Reddys. These are the names of tribal people there. Then further from east, west Godavari, if you go to Visakhapatnam, along the Araku valley, you have many tribal people, and the same stretch continues from Araku to Vijayanagaram as well as Srikakulam. Which tribal people do you find here? In Visakhapatnam, Srikakulam, Vijayanagaram, along the hills. Along the coast you have plain areas. There you don't have tribals. But along the hills you have many tribal people. So who do you find here? Valmiki, Savara, all these are the tribal people you will find there. So this is the broad regions in both. In Telangana you will find them mostly in Adilabad, next in Khammam, Bhadrachalam. In Bhadrachalam you will have many tribal people. Then Adilabad has one big chunk, then along Bhadrachalam you have, and Nallamala forest also has some extension into Telangana along Mehboob Nagar and Nagar Karnool. Even there you will find some Chenchu villages. South Telangana along Mehboob Nagar and Nagar Karnool districts. There you will find tribal people. Isn't it? What is the Telugu name for tribal people? Yes? Adi? Adivasi. There is another term as well. Tega. Okay. But we are referring to another popular term. Girijan. You might have heard about GCC. Girijan. Not Grameen, it is Girijan. Girijan Cooperative Corporation. You would have bought this honey, some tribal products, Araku Valley coffee. It's become very popular these days. So, you are aware of these people's existence, but you must have never thought about them or asked who are these people, what is different about them, are they like us? You would have never examined all these questions, right? So, whatever I told you so far are things you are familiar with. If you had gone on a trip to Srisailam, you would have seen some Chenchu people on the way. If you had gone to Bhadrachalam, you would have seen many tribal people there. If you went with your family to Araku Valley, you would have, the whole Araku Valley is full of tribal people. Starting from your driver to the restaurants, everybody is a tribal person there. But you must have never, you are aware of their existence, but you must have never asked, why are we calling them tribal people? What is different about them? Are they like us or are they different from us? If they are different, in what way? Now, clearly, what do you think about tribal people? Are they very advanced sections or are they weaker sections? Yes? From your awareness, from your little understanding of these people, what do you think of them? Are they very advanced sections in society? Do they live in big houses, driving BMWs and wearing a lot of gold chains and look fat? Or wearing 3-piece suits? How do they look? Malnourished usually, leading a hand-to-mouth existence. So, they are very poor, it's evident, right? So, they are clearly weaker sections. You must be aware of this. So, did you ever ask, why are they weaker sections? What are the factors? What are the reasons they are called as weaker sections? We would have not examined all these issues, right? So, we have to now look at these issues with more focus and with more clarity. You would have just had some awareness of these people and these issues at the back of your mind. You would have never put them forward and looked at them right in the eye. But in anthropology, now that you are willing to study anthropology, we have to pay attention to these details, right? We have to pay attention to all these details because the focus of anthropology is the study of man and study of culture. To study culture, it is not enough if you just study urban societies like ours. We have to study many tribal societies as well, because in tribal societies you find lot of diversity of culture. So, that is why anthropology has a special place for tribals. And when we study various institutions like marriage, kinship, religion, economic organization, family, we will look at various examples from tribal societies and see how those societies are working, how are they different. Is there anything good in that society? What can we learn from them? So, all this is necessary. But if I take you right away into the chapter, what will happen? So far, you don't know how tribal people live, right? You just have some vague idea. Until now, you probably never looked at this issue in detail. So, I want you to understand how these people look, where do they live, what is their culture like. I want you to develop a feel for their culture so that you develop an imagination. So that when we discuss concepts, you won't have difficulty in imagining these things, right? It should come naturally to you. That is why we will first watch some 20-25 minute videos on some different tribal people across India, because we cannot study all the tribal people in India. We have India has how many scheduled tribes? You must have heard this, right? SC, ST reservations. So, how many groups are there under scheduled tribe category? Roughly? You can make a guess. How many people do we have? How many groups do we have under scheduled tribe category? How many groups of people? There are about 700 communities across India who fall under the category of ST, scheduled tribe, and they are about, what is their percentage in Indian population? 8%. Yes? More or less, 8.6 to be specific. What is the percentage of reservation given to scheduled tribes? You are not aware? Because there is reservation in this exam as well. There is reservation in MSET, JEE. At every stage you have these quotas, right? So, what is the quota given for scheduled tribes? 7.5%. For scheduled castes, 15. For scheduled castes, we have 15% quota. For scheduled tribes, there is 7.5% quota in what? In all government colleges, in government employment, and most importantly in legislature, parliament and assembly. Do you have reserved constituencies? Yes? Can anybody go and contest from Bhadrachalam? Only a tribal person can contest from Bhadrachalam, right? Can anybody go and contest from Araku Valley MLA seat? Can you go and claim it? No, only a scheduled tribal person can contest. So, this is the broad detail. So, how many groups under ST? 700. How many? What is the percentage of population? 8.6. What is the reservation quota for them? 7.5. In what? Education, employment and legislature. This is the broad basic details. We will go into it. We will go into these details and more as we examine the syllabus. And broadly, where do you have scheduled tribes in India? Yes? Very good. Northeast. Most of Northeast is with tribal people. In fact, in Northeast you have many tribal dominated states. Do you know of any? Nagaland is of which tribal people? Nagas. Then another state with a famous tribal name. Mizoram recently was in news because of boundary dispute with Assam. So, Mizoram is dominated by whom? Mizos. Then Assam has many tribal people. Arunachal. Yes, Arunachal is least known to many people here, isn't it? It is out of our imagination usually. It is there on the map but not in our imagination. So, Arunachal is, yes? Yes, please come. Arunachal is full of tribal people as well. Then Meghalaya. Meghalaya has tribal people. So, Northeast is in general dominated by tribal people except for Tripura. Tripura is not a tribal state. It has many non-tribals. Apart from Tripura and parts of Manipur, most of Northeast is dominated by tribal people. Then after Northeast, where else do you see tribal people? We see tribal people in central India, starting from the Vindhyas all the way to eastern and western Ghats. In the central Indian forest region, starting from Chota Nagpur plateau, Vindhyas, to the eastern Ghats that we discussed just now. Eastern Ghats also run into Odisha. Odisha has many tribal people. So Odisha, AP, Telangana, Chhattisgarh, like our friend pointed out, Madhya Pradesh, Maharashtra, Karnataka, and Tamil Nadu and Kerala also have some tribal people, but not many. This is another second important region, northeast and central India. Then, where else do you find tribal people? Central and South India. Where else? Yes? Yes, the islands. What about island regions, Andaman and Nicobar? Do you have tribals there? Yes? Yes or no? Yes, Andaman and Nicobar also is dominated by tribal people. In fact, they are some of the most backward tribal people in the whole country. There is even one tribe which does not make contact with any outsider. If you go towards them, they will throw arrows at you. If you go towards their island, they will start throwing arrows at you, asking you to go away. If you still go, then you can bid farewell to your family, because the Navy or Coast Guard has to go to retrieve your body. So, this is a tribe. There is a tribe in Andaman and Nicobar which lives in total isolation. They are still not aware of fire. Forget iPhone. They still don't know the existence of fire. So, there is a tribe which lives in Andaman called the Sentinelese. They live in the North Sentinel Island. They live in total isolation. But apart from Sentinels, we have many other tribal people living in Andaman and Nicobar as well, along with Lakshadweep. Then the last region is the mountain region, Himalayas. The states of Jammu Kashmir, Uttarakhand and Himachal also have certain number of tribal people. They also have certain tribal people living, though they are not as dominant as the northeastern section. This is the broad geographical distribution of tribal people. So, over the next few days, today, tomorrow, we will first try to get an outline of the different tribal people. Today we will watch videos of two tribal people, and both of them are from central India and South India. Tomorrow, day after, we will try to look at tribals from northeast, tribals from the island region and some tribals from the mountainous areas, right. So that you now have an all India picture. Who are these tribals? How do they live? And most importantly, the two tribals are not similar to one another. Will a Chenchu person resemble the life of a Naga person? Both are scheduled tribes, right? But will they be similar in their culture and way of life? No. So, you will understand all these facts. Once this basic imagination, these basic details are clear to you, it will become easy for you to follow the course. That is why what I call this as developing imagination session. So that you first have a visual idea of what you are actually going to study over the next few months. That is very, very important. Otherwise, when we discuss these concepts, you will not feel any connect. You will find it very difficult to understand what are we trying to discuss, right. That is why we will watch some tribal profiles. After each video, we will have a short discussion and then go to the next. That is the format I had planned for today, right, for today and tomorrow. We will keep it light. We will begin our course on a lighter note, and slowly we will develop pace and we will give it more and more. We will infuse more content as we keep going forward. Clear? Yes.
Bastar district, Chhattisgarh, central India, the heart of a hilly and forested area, that extends into Maharashtra in the west, Orissa in the east, Jharkhand in the north, and Andhra in the south. This is where our song begins. The old man is playing the song of Lingodyo. Though there are regional variations, the legend of Lingopen is linked to the creation of mankind and is known throughout central India among its largest tribal group, the Gonds. Speaking a Dravidian tongue, the Gonds, or Koi as they call themselves, are among the oldest inhabitants of the subcontinent and are divided into many groups and subgroups like the Maurya, the Murya, the Halba, the Bison Horn Maurya and the Raj Gonds. The Gonds are distinguishable from the tribes that live among them like the Bega by their language and mythology. The Gonds are dark-skinned, short with rounded features and thick black hair. In the remote hills of Bastar, away from the influences of the mainstream, they wear the bare minimum. The women wear a short sari wrapped around the waist with a long free end that goes over the shoulder and covers the upper half. The men wear their hair long and are traditionally clad in a loincloth and with another piece of cloth tied around the head. It is common to see a wooden tobacco pouch dangling from the waist. The youth, both boys and girls, take great care to groom and decorate themselves. As one gets nearer to the plains and the roads, traditional clothes have been replaced by shorts, shirts and dhotis for men and saris with blouses for the women. There are no special birth-related rituals among the Gonds. In most cases, the children are not even named till the age of 3 when their physique and character starts to develop. A child is then named according to the character it has developed or if there is some characteristic that reminds its family of an ancestor. Central to the Gond way of life and the continuance of its culture is the dormitory for the youth called Ghotul. Similar institutions have been found in tribal societies all over the world. The youth, both boys and girls, become members of the Ghotul around puberty until they get married. The girls in the Ghotul are known as Motiari, while the boys are called Cheliks, with Bilosa and Kotwar respectively as their elected heads. The Ghotul is like a well-defined society within the larger society of the village. There are strict codes of conduct and duties laid out for the members of the Ghotul to follow. These are designed to teach the youth Gond traditions and prepare them for their responsibilities as adults. Most importantly, it instills a sense of community among its inmates and ensures that when they grow older, they are able to live in harmony with one another and their natural environment. The Gonds have a simple and natural attitude towards sex. Sexual congress between Cheliks and Motiaris belonging to different clans is encouraged within the Ghotul, and it is because of this that the Ghotuls have come under attack from social workers and reformers coming from the mainstream. As a result, very few Ghotuls can be found in villages these days. Even where they do exist, the Gonds hesitate to talk about them. The Gonds are divided into different clans. These clans are exogamous and children are born into the clans of their father. Friendships formed in the Ghotul often lead to marriage. At the time of marriage, the groom, along with male members of the village, sets up the marriage pole in his house. This is symbolic of the establishment of a new family. These poles are carved and painted with depictions of the sun, the moon, and symbols of the groom's clan. Living among nature, Gond life is directed towards raising food from the earth, either by cultivation, by gathering the fruits of the forest, or by hunting and fishing. Traditionally, Marya communities practiced a slash and burn form of agriculture, where a patch of forest was cleared and tilled for a few years till its yield was good, after which the land was left for the forest to reclaim, and the community would move on to another area. This practice was banned under British rule, and today Marya villages are settled. Millets such as kodo and kutki are the main cultivated crops, though rice is planted where there is ample water. More than agriculture, however, it is the relationship of the Gonds to the forest that is most important. They have inherited an intimate knowledge of the forest and its seasonal cycles. This knowledge is vital for their survival even today. This settlement of Marya Gonds has migrated from an area about 100 kilometers away. Their forests were badly depleted due to the large-scale felling of trees, and they were forced to leave. It takes 2 days of hard labor out in the forest to gather a head load of bamboo, which is then woven into a basket and sold in the local market. While in the forest, they also manage to collect silk pods that can be exchanged for the occasional treat. Housemaking activities take place in summer when there is no work in the fields. The walls of the houses are made of mud by hand, and the roof tiles are made with the help of simple, locally designed tools and molds. Once formed and dried, they are fired in a pit dug in the ground. On the inside, Gond houses are simple and marked with a bare minimum on possessions. Women, by and large, share equal status with the men. The site for a village is selected according to the availability of natural resources, especially the availability of water. A traditional Gond well is lined with a hollowed out tree trunk and water is drawn out with a ladle made out of a dried out gourd. Out in the forest, a pit in a dried out riverbed is a source of drinking water. With the help of a well-concealed net, the Gonds are also able to trap small birds in this pit. Toddy tapping is very popular among the Gonds. The favorite toddy is that of the sago or fish-tailed palm. Unlike the use of mahua liquor, which has more ritual dimensions, the consumption of palm toddy is more for pleasure and is believed to be good against stomach ailments. The Gonds have always been skillful hunters. In earlier times, they were known to hunt tigers, wild buffaloes and wild boars. The village would organize collective hunts where all the male members of the village would go out to hunt together. The spoils of the hunt would then be distributed equally among all the families. The evenings after the hunts would be marked by wild celebrations. This dance, performed by a group of Raj Gonds, depicts the hunting of a buffalo. The buffalo keeps on eluding them and they try different ways, including magic, to trap him, till they finally manage to kill him. This dance is a reminder of mankind's first attempts to tame nature. Similar dances and sports can be seen all over the world, as with the famous bullfights of Spain. The mahua tree is the most sacred tree among the Gonds, as it is a source of food, oil and above all, liquor. In March, when the tree blossoms, one can see people heading out early in the morning towards the fields and forests to collect the flowers that drop from the tree. According to legend, mahua liquor was discovered by Lingo himself, and the Gonds serve it at ceremonial occasions. The clan gods demand it, and it is the best way to appease the spirits of the departed. The major share of cash income comes from the collection and sale of tendu leaves. Available for only 4 weeks in a year, tendu leaves used for rolling beedis fetch a good price. This trade too is controlled by contractors. The contractors dictate the prices and in many areas start forest fires just before the season starts. This is said to increase the yield, but it destroys other plants in the forest. In some areas, the government has taken over from the contractors and the Gonds get better rates for the leaves they collect. In this village, the villagers have formed their own collective. They protect their forest from outsiders and by holding together, manage to negotiate a good price. They also ensure that the trees are not overplucked and destroyed forever. Apart from bamboo and tendu, there are a number of other minor forest produce like tamarind, dhimal and scores of medicinal plants that the Gonds collect and sell in the market. In exchange, they mostly buy plastic goods of daily use and synthetic clothes. So far, the trade is largely disorganized and the urban-based traders tend to dictate the prices, often to the disadvantage of the tribal people. Though there have been some efforts to organize this sector known as minor forest produce, careful intervention could result in this becoming another major source of income for tribal people. Elders in Maurya society enjoy a favored position, and this respect continues after their death. These immortal spirits of the ancestors continue to play a vital role in everyday affairs of the Maurya life. Displeased spirits of the ancestors are believed to cause illness and other calamities such as failed crops. The Maurya bury their dead. Gravestones that depict the way a person lived mark the place of burial. In some areas, one can see stones erected in the memory of the departed. Though this megalithic practice is fast disappearing, there is a belief that if the soul of the ancestor is satisfied with the arrangements made for it, then the stone will grow in size. The Gond way of life has seen the most changes in the last couple of decades. With the coming of roads and schools, they get more and more assimilated into the mainstream. Unfortunately, this assimilation happens in ways where they are at a disadvantage, and in the pursuit of new ways of livelihood, they lose their distinct identity. In spite of good intentions, government schemes have been unable to stop this trend. They are unable to realize the potential and knowledge of indigenous people. The tribal, in the end, has lost her means of livelihood, and her cultural heritage has lost its vitality. Often, as is the case with these Maurya Gonds near Kanker in Bastar, the traditional dance has lost its original purpose and become a mere exotic performance.
So what did you see? Let us discuss this brief video. But before that, let us begin with some basic terminology. Before, who did you watch? How would you describe what you watched today? Is it some kind of a tribal profile? Right? It is some kind of a profile of a tribe. Now, what is a technical word to describe this? You watched one tribal people, right? What did you watch? The various aspects of life of a tribe. The tribe in this particular case is Gonds. So, about Gonds, you watched the various aspects like their everyday life, their economy, their marriage practices. Yes? What is it? Rituals. Rituals, yes, their rituals, their ceremonies, and also their intergenerational relationships, all these things, right? What do we call this? It is culture. But the other word to describe a tribal profile is ethnography. So, what is it? This description of a tribe. Since we studied tribal people and their cultures, we have to describe each tribes, we have to describe their culture like this, right? This kind of description is called by a word. What is that word? It is ethnography. This is the first term that we are introducing in our subject. What is the first term? Ethnography. What is ethnography? What is ethno? Let us break this word into two parts, ethno and graphy. What is ethno? You use the word, right? Ethnic wear, ethnic food, ethnic medicine. What is ethnic? Traditional? No. The word ethno means culture. It is a root word for cultural wear or cultural food. So, ethno means culture. What is graphy? Studies ology, sociology, anthropology. What is graphy? Graphy is description. What is graphy? So, ethnography is a cultural description or description of culture. So, through ethnography, ethnography refers to a profile, a cultural description or a cultural account of any given tribe. You can take any given tribe and we can explore the different sites, the different aspects of the particular tribe is described through ethnography. So, what is the meaning of ethnography? Ethnography refers to a cultural description. Usually in anthropology, this whole discipline of anthropology was born when? When do you think anthropology was born? Yes? In 19th century. So, what was the need for anthropology in 19th century, though it was not present earlier? Yes? Can you switch on these lights there? These. Just put all of them on, yes. What was the need for anthropology in 18th and 19th century when it was not there before that? What happened in 18th and 19th century? Maybe just please see if this can be switched off, just this. great. Thank you. You are being of great service to all of us. Yes. So what is the need for anthropology in 18th and 19th century? Anthropology was born around 19th century, strictly. Why? What happened in 19th century? Any idea?
Exploitation of tribes.
Yes? Imperialism. Yes. Please come forward. What happened in 19th century? Imperialism, isn't it? Or colonialism. In the Europe, something called as industrial revolution began to happen in Europe, and European countries like Britain, Germany, France became huge industrial economies. Until then they were a farming economy like anybody else, but with this huge industrial power they developed lot of technological capability. They developed huge industries. They were using coal and building big smelting units for iron ore, and they also created big vessels, ships that could sail across continents. So having developed this huge power through industrial revolution in the 18th and 19th century, the European powers were now hungry for more. They wanted to go and explore the world and use the world's resources to develop themselves. So that's how British, French, various European countries sent their navies, sent their merchant vessels to Asia and Africa. That's how they came to India as well, right? They came to India as traders and eventually conquered the whole country. So in 18th and 19th centuries, European powers were trying to conquer the whole world and bring it under their control. So what happened now? Somebody in Europe, a white man, was finding it necessary to come to Africa, to come to India and rule over these people. The British had to come to India, for example. Now would a British man who comes to India, he may defeat Indian rulers through warfare because they had better arms, better equipment. They could defeat the country. Now, can you rule the country just by defeating the army? They had a problem now. They could defeat the local rulers in both Asia and Africa. But the problem after defeating is that you can't govern a country just by military force. Can you? You can't govern a country by military force. Now they had a new problem. How do we govern these people? They are so different from us. They don't look like us, they don't speak our language, their culture is different, their ways of life are different. They have some different religions. We just believe in one God, monotheism. They believe in so many gods. In addition, there are plants, trees and souls. They have different customs of marriage, different customs of divorce, different customs of inheritance. So how do we handle these people? That was a big question they were faced with. That is how anthropology was born. Then they asked some scholars, see, please help us understand these people. Please help us understand the culture of these people. Only if we understand their culture will we be able to rule them. Because we are alien powers. We come somewhere in Europe. We have come across the seas to this distant land and we have no idea about these people. So some scholars were asked to study these people, understand them and help them make sense of this distant alien culture. That is how anthropology was born. Anthropology was born out of the needs of colonial powers to understand the local, the native cultures, right? So that is the story of anthropology. In 18th and 19th centuries, when there was this new contact across the world, until then the world was, each region lived in total isolation from the rest of the world. In fact, The world did not know about the existence of South and North America until 16th century, when Amerigo Vespucci and Christopher Columbus sailed across. They thought they will fall off the edge of the map. When Christopher Columbus was sailing to the west from Europe, he was told, don't sail far, you will fall off the edge. They thought the world is a table and it's a flat surface, and if you keep sailing to the end, you will fall off the edge and go into the abyss. But what did Columbus realized after sailing further west? The world is not flat, but it's round. You can go and come around the same place again. So in the process, he discovered America. So this whole age, it is called the age of exploration. They began to, with the development of technology and with huge ships at their disposal, European powers began to discover parts of the world which was not known to them. That led to interconnected world, right? So until then, each region lived as if they were all by themselves. But starting with the 17th, 18th and 19th century, people began to come in greater contact. And this contact began with Europeans going to different parts of the world and trying to defeat the locals and bring the local regions under their control. That is how India was brought under whose control? British. Just like India was under British control, who was controlling? France was controlling, for example, the Cambodia, Laos, Vietnam. Indonesia was controlled by the Dutch. So each European power had its own set of colonies that they were trying to rule. So because of this contact between the West and the East, because of this contact between two different set of cultures, now there was a need for a discipline which studies culture, which studies different cultures and which helps bridge this cultural divide. That is how anthropology was born. So when these anthropologists were asked to go and study locals, how do you study these locals now? They said go to each tribe and understand, first just understand what is their life like. So they went with a paper, pen, set of books to a tribal village. They settled down there for a while. They learned the tribal language because this person comes from Europe. He speaks English or French. The tribal people speak entirely a different language, isn't it? There is a language barrier. So they used to go down there. First they used to learn the language. Then their only job was to learn the language, observe their life and write about it. Observe their life and write about it. So they learned, observed their life, understood, okay, this is how these people live. This is their economy. This is their society. They have clans. They have lineages. Their religion is based on such beliefs. Their God is somebody. Their marriage happens in this way. This is how they share property. If they have quarrels among themselves, how do they resolve? Do they have any customs? Do they have any laws? How are women treated? Is marriage between one man, one woman, or between multiple people? Is divorce easy or very difficult? How are children raised? What is family structure? Is it joint family, nuclear family, or what is it? So they began to write all these details, and on each tribe they would write about a few pages. That became, what is it? Ethnography. So the first job of anthropologists was to just go out, identify each tribal people, live with them and develop a writing. Just develop a description of the people, because we don't even know how they live to begin with. So that is how from the early as anthropology was being born, the earliest work generated by anthropology was ethnographies. They began to write about different tribal people and they began to describe how these people live. Many Western, British and German scholars like Max Muller, Charles Metcalfe, they came and wrote about Indians because the British rulers did not understand Indian culture. They didn't understand why is there a Shiva, why is there a Vishnu, why is there a Brahma, while we have just one simple God. And these people have different castes. What is this caste system? These people believe in life after death. So what is this belief of life after death? Where do they go after death? So the British were curious. Just like various tribal ethnographies were being built, the British also asked some scholars to study Indian castes and Indian tribes. So basically, that is how anthropology came up with this cultural descriptions, and what do we call them? Ethnographies. So on each tribe you will have a few tens of pages of ethnography. But of course, can we study all of that? Can we go into detailed examination of each tribal ethnography? Yes? Can we? We can't. Are you preparing for a PhD in anthropology? You are not, right? You are preparing to crack the civil service exam. So our idea is not to go into detailed ethnographies. Our idea is to know important aspects of culture of some tribes so that we understand what we are studying. That is why instead of making you read all those details, we are just going through videos, which is more easy to read about 20 pages about Gond tribe or to watch a 20-minute documentary of Gond tribe. Which will have more impact on you? That is why we are simplifying that process by trying to examine the ethnography of a particular tribe through a video format. So whatever we watched for the past 20 to 25 minutes can be called as ethnography. On Friday we watched ethnography of Chenchus. What we watched on Friday is a ethnography of Chenchus, and what we watched just now is a ethnography of Gonds. Clear? What is ethnography? A cultural description. And what is the name of the tribe that we have watched today? Gonds, right? There is a Telegram group for the course, so please after the class you can reach out to the desk. They will add all of you onto the Telegram group. There I will share all the video links including the Chenchu link from the Friday, and we will also share our handouts and material on the group. So please join that group and regularly check it for updates. If there is a change in class time or if there are any announcements that I have to make, I will make it directly on the Telegram group. There is a Telegram group for the course and please join it. Now coming to Gonds, let us now discuss details about Gonds. Right, so now you are clear about the brief history of anthropology. Yes, so when was anthropology born? 19th century. What was the reason for birth of anthropology? Colonialism and imperialism. The contact of cultures made it necessary for the imperial countries, that is the Western countries, to understand the East. That is how anthropology was born. That is how anthropology took birth. Clear? Yes? Yes. And what was the earliest work done by anthropologists? What was the earliest work? They developed ethnographies. They developed ethnographies of the tribal people they were studying, right? Great. Next, now we will discuss in brief the ethnography of Gonds. What are the broad details we have to know about any tribe? Tell me, what details did you register from Gond video? What are the details which you could register, which you could follow from this brief documentary that we watched earlier today? Yes? Very good. First, their name. Where are they from? First detail is you know their name. They are Gonds. Yes? Now, where do they live? Yes? Where do they live? Bastar? Very good. They live in? Where is Bastar? Chhattisgarh. They live in Bastar in Chhattisgarh. Very good. Next, what did you also see about these tribal people?
Economic activities.
Very good. What is their economic activity? Collecting? So, but they are doing many activities. First, are they doing only one thing? Like us, go to job and come back? Are they doing just one activity? What is our way of life? You wake up, prepare for office, take a metro, come back in the same metro at 6:30 and you eat some food, you watch some movie and sleep. Again, you repeat, waiting for the weekend. Right? So, are they living like that? Clearly, they are doing multiple things, but they are doing one thing more. What is that? Agriculture. Along with agriculture, one main activity, they are doing many other supporting activities. Clear? Yes? So, Gonds are primarily an agricultural tribe. But is their agriculture like our agriculture? Is it complex like ours? Are they using tractors? Are they using irrigation? Do you see acres of land being tilled and grown? No. They are doing some kind of simple agriculture. The agriculture is simple. It may be slash and burn. What is slash and burn? What is slash and burn is also called as shifting cultivation. What is this slash and burn or shifting cultivation? First, are we agreeing that the Gond agriculture is very simple? It is lacking complex technology, right? Do you see tractors? Do you see agricultural pumps? Do you see irrigation canals? Do you see any of that? No. Why? Why is the agriculture not complex? Yes? Okay. Is there any other reason?
The lands are by the river. By the water they choose the land so that water is available to them.
Okay. Any other reason? Logical reason?
Less contact with the modern population.
Yes?
Not in line with the mainstream.
Not in line with mainstream, but can you do complex agriculture on hilly slopes? Yes? On hills, can you do large scale agriculture? To do such complex agriculture, you need to have plain area, right? So, one, the geography doesn't support complex agriculture, and like all of you said, second, they are living in the interiors, and due to absence of cultural contact, their exposure to technology is very, very limited. Their exposure to technology is highly limited. So, because of this, their agriculture is simple. Now, some Gonds also do what is called as shifting cultivation. What is shifting cultivation? What is shifting cultivation?
Clearing of forest for planting crops.
Clearing of forest. Okay, so what is shifting about it?
Then they leave that place and go to other area and clear that.
Okay. So, did you understand it? What is the regular agriculture that you are all familiar with? In agriculture, first there is land, there is a person, right? The farmer and the land. What is your traditional understanding of agriculture? The farmer is tied to the land. A farmer has a piece of land, he keeps cultivating it. That's your traditional understanding of agriculture, right? You sow a crop, you harvest it, you clear the crop, then again prepare the same land for next crop. That's how we do agriculture, right? But that is not how many tribals do agriculture. They don't fix the land, they rotate the land. What do we do in our villages? We fix the land and we rotate the crop. The crop is rotated but the land is fixed. What do? They first, since the population is very small, they are living in forests and the population is very small compared to the land available. Second, they don't have complex technology. So what do? They clear a piece of land. Now, first they clear a forest and a piece of land is open for cultivation. They just sow some seeds. The burnt forest acts as a fertilizer. We have to apply urea, right? You have to throw urea and other manure to grow your crops. They naturally let the burnt forest act as the nutrients and they let the rain act as water source and the crops grow naturally. When the crop grows, they harvest it and it is done. After 6 months, the whole thing is done. What do they do now? What would we do? We will clear the crop and again sow on the land. They leave that land, go to a new patch of land. They find a new patch of land, they remove the forest again, they burn the forest, again repeat the process, throw some seeds and let rain supply it with water, and when the harvest is available they take it. After that they go to third patch of land. Are you getting the idea? Unlike conventional agriculture, in shifting cultivation, people are shifting their land. They move from one land parcel to another land parcel to another land parcel. That is why we call this as shifting cultivation. Can we do this in our villages? Why? Why not? Yes? Why not? We don't have so much land. We don't have so much land. We don't have the luxury of land to pull off something like this. There is not enough land for us to do this. But in tribal society, since they live in hills and they don't have complex technology, they use this kind of method. They use this kind of method to work on their land, right? So that is why we call this as shifting cultivation. And of course, naturally, shifting cultivation will not be as productive as complex agriculture. If in complex agriculture, if 1 acre gives you 1000 bags of rice, can you expect 1000 bags of rice from shifting cultivation? Can you? Because there is no use of chemicals, there is no use of intensive agriculture, there is no use of technology. So can you expect the same level of yield and productivity? No. So naturally the yields are very limited. So what do? They depend on this produce, but they say at the same time they also go about hunting occasionally, they fish in the river, they collect some forest produce. So they diversify. They diversify and rely on multiple food sources to support themselves. That is what we mean by shifting cultivation. So in shifting cultivation, they keep moving year after year to a new patch of land, and it takes about 5 years for them to come back to the original patch. In that 5 years, the original patch would have again become a forest and the land would have been recharged. So now again they clear it and again cultivate. That is how they go about shifting cultivation. Is this clear? Yes? So what is the kind of occupation the Gonds have? Agriculture, and it is a simple agriculture which is supported by other activities like hunting, collecting forest produce and some fishing. Clear? Next, what else did you notice about Gond people? First, they are Gonds, they live in Bastar, they are an agricultural tribe.
Religion.
Okay, what about religion? Do they have a god? You were hearing some frustrating music, annoying music all through the video, right? Throughout the video there was some kind of annoying music in the background. Was it annoying or pleasant? Yes? Neither. Unusual music, right? They are using some kind of a simple instrument, a chord instrument like your violin, but not like violin, but a very simple instrument, and they were singing for somebody. Who was it? Their god. Their god has a name. What is the name? Lingo. And they are praying to the god to bless them, to produce, to bless them with children, to bless them with enough food and all that. So, yes, like you said, they also have a well developed religious belief with a god. There is a set of rituals surrounding that god. Do they have rituals around that god? Do they have some belief system about the god, his name? There is a story behind that god. Like we have stories, right? Do we have stories about our gods? Yes? Do we have stories about our gods? About Krishna there are some stories. About Vishnu there are some stories. The whole Bhagavatam is about how the god appears in 9 different forms. And the same goes to other religions like Islam, Christianity. You have the Bible which talks about the Christ's miracles. The Quran talks about the prophets' war exploits. So, just like we have stories about our gods, they also have stories about their god. So, they have a well developed religious belief. Next, what else? Talk about women. How are the men-women relations here? Yes? Do you see that women are given? On what basis are you saying women have equal status? What made you come to that conclusion? It is true that women have a high status in many tribal societies. But my question is, we will get there, but my question is, what is it in that video that made you conclude that women have an equal status? Yes? What do you mean by economic support?
They are also involved in economic activities.
Very good. Women are involved in economic activities like men. Yes? Are women participating in outdoor activities like men, or women are asked to sit at home and not come out? They are participating. Very good. Next. What else? So, one major basis on which we can say that women have equal status is the role given to women in economic activities. Women are allowed to come out and participate. And in Gond society, you must have noticed that in the passing they describe a very interesting institution. I am not sure if you had registered it. It is a very unique institution or a very unique system in the Gond society. In fact, they are very well known for it. Did you notice it? Yes? No birth rituals. Something else. Yes? They are traditional dance, not just that.
They won't name their child every 3 years.
Okay. There was another institution they described. What about marriage? What about marriage? They talked about something called as yes? Does it ring bells now? What was the word used to describe this youth dormitory? They talked about something called as a youth dormitory, also called as, what is this youth dormitory or Gotul? Gotul is the word used by Gonds. The English word to describe it is youth dormitory. What is this youth dormitory? It's a moral science class. What is it? Yes, please. Every evening? No, you are right. Go on.
What they should do and then all of this.
Okay. What else? What did you notice about this youth dormitory? This is a very unusual institution that we find only in some tribes, and the Gonds are very famous for this. In fact, a lot has been written about this particular institution for its very, very unique range, unique style. What is this youth dormitory? What is a dormitory? Large big rooms. This is a large big room. Some kind of, you would have, if you're in a hostel, you would have had this huge room with beds, right? That is a dormitory. What's a dormitory? Some kind of a place where all the young people usually live together, cohabit. So what is this youth dormitory? In Gonds, this is, there in each village there is a group, like a club. We have clubs, right? Like hobbies, you have clubs where those who share common interests come together. Women may have women's clubs in apartments, and they may have occasional get together, some occasional meeting where they may play some sport, have some lunch, or they may organize a trip. So just like that, this is a group of the young people. What is a youth dormitory? It is a group for the young people in every village. So, and these people have a place, they have their own club, they have their own place. So outside the village, there is a big hut that is allocated to them. This is yours, use it. So what is now, in every club, you must have membership. Can you, without membership, can you say I am part of the club? You must go and enroll, right? So, in this youth dormitory, how do you get membership? Membership is natural. Membership, every person who gets through puberty, every boy and girl who has attained maturity, then becomes a member of youth dormitory. And they also exit. You can't keep entering, right? If everybody keeps entering, then the whole village will be part of the dormitory. It will not make sense. If the whole village is part of it, will it make any sense? It has to exist as a separate unit from the village. So, the young people enter at puberty and they leave at, when do they leave the group? Marriage. So, during this puberty marriage period, between the puberty and marriage period, what do we see? Between the puberty and marriage period, people in the village, between puberty and marriage period, they live, they are part of this club, they are part of this group. All the young people of the ages from adulthood, from sexual maturity till they get married, they are part of the youth dormitory. All the young people, that is teenagers basically. It is some kind of a teenagers club. What are they doing by bringing these two teenagers together? What is the purpose? What is the logic? Do they have schools like our school? Like we have schools, right? Do you see any school in that Gond village? They don't have any proper education system. So what do? The young people are grouped together And in these dormitories or gotuls, it is expected that the older boys and girls will teach the younger boys and girls various aspects of tribal life. How to hunt, how to do agriculture. They may teach the tribal people various aspects of the tribal history, their customs, their marriage practices. All these norms and practices are conveyed and taught to the tribals by the senior members to the juniors in this youth dormitory. Are you understanding the purpose of this? But it is not just that. That is one angle. One angle is the one purpose, one important function played by this dormitory is the education. Education in tribal culture, isn't it? Education in the tribal culture and tribal skills. That education happens through youth dormitories. Next, the youth dormitories also are helpful for other purposes. Secondly, what happens in youth dormitories? This is a group of young people, right? So, if the village has a need, there is a need, let's say there is a need to organize a festival, there is a need for some dance on an event, like Dasara event, like we have Dasara, they may have something else. Or there is a need to build some house, repair all the houses. Then the youth groups are called for help. It happens in villages also, right? The young people are given responsibility to organize certain events and they take it up with lot of energy, like maybe Ganesh festivals during Ganesh Chaturthi and so on. So they organize a lot of, they support they give assistance in organizing many social activities. Beyond this, there is a third and very controversial and very interesting role played by these youth dormitories, that is sexual education. In this youth dormitories, in tribal society, they have a very, very liberal and open attitude towards sex. In our society, sex is a taboo. You don't talk about it. Parents don't discuss with children and many don't even talk about it with their friends. So in our society, sexual education is nearly absent, isn't it? It is absent. But it is not so in tribal societies and it is not so even in the West, where sex is not such a taboo or a silent topic. It is a no-go area in Indian culture. It's a big problem because in India, when HIV was a big issue, many social workers had a problem in dealing with HIV. If Indians don't talk about sex, how do you get them to understand about a sexually disease? HIV is a STD, a sexually transmitted disease, right? So if Indians don't talk about sex, how do you address a sexually transmitted disease? So Red Cross and many other health organizations working on public health had a huge challenge in dealing with HIV in India, because Indians are unusually silent about sex. It is not so in West and in Africa as well. But tribal society is a different story. There, it is not such a silent topic. And in youth dormitories, the young people are encouraged to explore their sexual lives. They have a very active sexual life in these youth dormitories. I have to shout on top of my voice, competing with the rain. So, yes. What happens in tribal societies? In our society, premarital sex and the so-called dating is not approved, right? Parents are always concerned that their daughters may be misguided or drawn into unwanted romantic relationships. Likewise, some boys' parents are also worried that a smart girl might sweep their son off his feet. So you are always in surveillance, though you are not aware of it. Is it not so? Your parents are constantly on the lookout, just to make sure you are not carried away by youthful romantic feelings. So, in our societies, usually this is discouraged. There is a lot of restriction on the intersexual relationships. Your parents don't tell you go out and date, right? If anything, they'll tell you not to do it. So, here in our society, there is a rigid code on sexual activity or sexual relations. But that is not the case in many tribal societies, and in Gonds, it is definitely not so. In many tribal societies, premarital sex and multiple relationships are encouraged. So the culture encourages this. So among the Gonds, in the Gotul, what happens? During the day, the elders go out into the forest, they go out into the field and do their work. The young people are left in the Gotul. They have their own premises outside the village where they meet and play, have fun, song, dance, everything. There, among the Gotul, the men and women, the boys and girls, they also engage in multiple relationships before marriage. They are in fact encouraged to have multiple relationships, and so that by the time they reach 18-20, they are expected to know for sure this boy or this girl is the person I want to marry. Then when they marry, they are out of the Gotul. But while they are in the Gotul, during their teenage, they are encouraged and they are allowed to have a lot of freedom in terms of dating, in terms of sexual relations. So, the men and women in Gotul engage in a lot of romantic and sexual relationships. So, the Gotul also serves as some kind of a institution for sex education among the tribals. So, in the Gond society, premarital sex is very common. Premarital sex is quite common, and if a child is born out of such relationships, let's say a child is born out of this kind of relationships, in our society the child is treated as a very negatively. He is called as a bastard, right? But there is no such problem. The child is raised as any other member of the society. He is not given a negative image. So the Gotul acts as a very, very important institution in the tribal society in terms of sexual education, in terms of deciding marriage partners. You have lot of marriage portals, right? When you want to get married, what do your parents do? They go to a matrimony website and they create a profile for you. Age, education, hobbies, interests, caste, religion, and expected economic status and all that. But do Gonds have these kind of marriage bureaus and marriage portals? No, right? So, the Gotul acts as a place where the young men and young women come together and get to identify who is most suitable for them. Like recently, now these days we are also having some dating websites like Tinder. It is famous among many young people, right? A dating platform. So, in the absence of dating platform, the Gotul institution acts as a place where the boys and girls get to know each other and they spend time together before deciding on who to finally marry. And all this does not mean that the Gonds do not have a stable marriage. Very surprisingly, despite the enormous sexual freedom they have before marriage, post marriage they also tend to have quite stable marriages. And many anthropologists think that because of this freedom to choose their partner before marriage, the Gonds are sure, the men and women are sure who they are marrying. But quite often in many societies, especially in Indian societies, that is not the case, right? We have something called as arranged marriages. In arranged marriages, two strangers suddenly come together and they are married. 2 months ago you were strangers, 2 months after that you are swearing your life for each other. It's quite not natural. It takes time to develop that bond. Sometimes if you make a decision without knowing enough in arranged marriage, and if the decision is not well made, it can lead to a lot of marital problems. But in the Gond society, that is rare. And interestingly, even after all this, divorce, in our society, divorce is very hard, right? So we have a mythology around marriage. Marriage is seen as a one-time commitment that must never be broken. Janma janmal anubandham. As if one life is not enough, it is seen as a bond that transcends many births. But among tribal societies, that is not the case. In Gonds also, divorce is quite easy. Divorce is quite easy. So, whenever I find time, I go on a tribal visits. I visit a particular tribe, stay with them for a few days, a week, understand their culture. So once I went to a tribal village. This is the tribals of Savara along the Andhra-Odisha border. So the elder man who was showing me around told me the divorce is very simple here. Last week we gave a divorce. So what happened? There was a woman who was married, but she now fell in love with another man. So what to do? She ran away. Now the husband came to the village elders. What do we do? My wife, I paid bride price. They have bride price, not dowry, opposite. Man has to pay for the wife. So I paid 5,000 as bride price and she ran away. So the village called her, the woman and her lover. Said, what is it? They said, we are in love. So they said, fine, you are in love, that is fine, we will break the marriage, provided you pay 10,000 as fine. 5,000 for the man, your husband, because he paid bride price. Another 5,000 for the village feast. Since you are breaking the marriage, you have to give a feast to the village, and now you are free to marry whoever you want. No drama, no chaos. Because in tribal areas, marriage is not seen as a unbreakable bond or anything. If two people are happy in it, it works. If the woman wants divorce, she can get it very easily. But in our society, men may get divorced quite easily, but can women get it easily? For women, divorce is very hard. Divorce is, because especially in Hinduism, marriage is seen as an unbreakable bond. There is no scope for divorce in Hindu religion. There is only scope for marriage. Islam unusually has that practice. In Islam, there is both provision for marriage as well as provision for divorce. But Hinduism, there is no provision for divorce. So tribal societies are not like that. So because of these multiple factors, what are these factors? Women have choice in who they marry. They decide who they marry. There are no restrictions on women's sexuality. Women is free to explore her sexual life, her sexual side through the youth dormitories. And there is no restriction on divorce as well. Because of these multiple factors, women in tribal society, especially in the Gond society, have a relatively high freedom. Two factors. Primarily, there is no restriction on their outdoor activity. In traditional Hinduism, there are many disabilities on women, right? They are not supposed to take part in agriculture. Women are supposed to be at home, manage the affairs. If you step out, you must wear a parda, cover your face. Then many other restrictions like women cannot, child marriages, absence of divorce, sati, widow remarriages, absence of education, all of this have traditionally reduced women's status, isn't it, in traditional Hindu society. There were all these disabilities on women, but that is not the case in Gond society. They can choose who they want to marry, there is no restriction on their sexual life, then divorce is easy. They are also allowed to take part in economic activities. They are very important for economy. Men cannot manage without women. So because of all this, they enjoy relatively high status. So along with religion, we also discussed the status of women and the institution of youth dormitory. So youth dormitory was studied extensively by anthropologists among Gonds. Though it is there in many other tribals, it is studied extensively by anthropologists among the Gonds because of the richness of this institution, and many anthropologists praised it. Clearly, isn't this a progressive idea or is it a bad idea? What do you think? Is this system of youth dormitory a progressive measure or is it a backward idea? Today you are all thinking of dating, but the Gonds had it already in their culture, already it is there in their culture. Today you are all trying to fight your parents with respect to saying, I will choose, I know who I want to marry. So it has to be forced into our culture, but in their culture it is naturally present. In fact, due to contact with Hinduism and Christianity, this institution has in fact been killed. Many Hindu contact and many Christian missionaries have entered Gond villages and they have criticized this institution, saying this is not moral. They felt this is not moral and they imposed their own beliefs on the Gond society, and today this institution is by and large declining and almost absent. But traditionally, Gonds have a rich institution of youth dormitory where they get to choose who they want, where the young people, the women and men, each of them probably dates multiple people before deciding who they want to marry. Because of that, after marriage, there is no sexual jealousy as well. Because the men and women know for sure that in their youth, they have done all the exploration. Now it is time to settle down and run a family. But when this kind of freedom is not present in the younger life, what happens? All the pent-up frustration leads to cheating and multiple affairs post-marriage, which happens in our societies very often. So the Gonds institution, thus this institution was studied by one anthropologist in great detail. He is called as Verrier Elwin. Verrier Elwin is a British anthropologist who settled down in India to work for the benefit of tribal people. And Verrier Elwin studied the Gonds, especially the Gond youth dormitory, in great detail. He was amazed by this cultural practice, so much so he actually married a Gond lady. He is an Oxford educated Christian priest who settled down in the Gond villages, and he married a Gond lady, and when she left him for another man, he moved on to another Gond lady, and he had a son with both these women. He had sons with both these women. So Verrier Elwin came to Gonds and he studied extensively this institution and wrote about it. That is why this is famous. So right, are these basic details about Gonds clear? Where do they live? What is their economy, their religion, their women marriage and their youth dormitories? And interestingly, the Gonds are not a single tribe. Please note this. In fact, Gonds are one of the largest tribal group in the entire country. Gonds are the largest tribal group in the entire country, one of the largest. Their population is over a crore. So these Gonds, they are spread across states of Madhya Pradesh, Chhattisgarh and Telangana. They are spread across Madhya Pradesh, Chhattisgarh as well as Telangana primarily. And there are multiple sub-tribes. So a tribe can have multiple sub-tribes, subgroup, a major tribe. If it is a small tribe, Chenchu is a small tribe. Their population is in a few thousands or lakhs, that's all. So they are all one big group. But Gonds, because of their huge number and because of their spread over a large area, there are multiple subgroups. For example, there are Maria Gonds, there are also Muria Gonds. In Telangana we have Raj Gonds. So a big tribe can be broken down, can consist of multiple smaller groups, right? So there is Maria Gond, Muria Gond and Raj Gond. In fact, this area of Gonds has a name. This whole area where Gonds live, there is a name for it. Yes? Gondwana. At one time there was even a demand for a separate state like Telangana and Jharkhand. There was a demand for a separate state of Gondwana, Gond tribal state. Of course, it was not a given. So these people also have their own language. What is their language? Gondi. They have their own language called as it is called as Gondi. So we know their area, we know their language, we know their multiple subgroups and we know different aspects of their culture. And we also know the name of the anthropologist who contributed the most for the study of Gond people, right? Do we not know who is he? Verrier Elwin. Is he an Indian anthropologist? He is a British anthropologist. In fact, the story is very interesting. He is a clergyman. He is a clergyman who was sent by the church as a missionary. He is part of an organization called as CSS, Christ Seva Sangh. And his objective, his job description was very simple and straightforward. Go into the Gond area and convert the Gonds tribal people into Christianity. So he came with that objective. But there, when he came to this Gond people, he was so impressed by their innocence, he was so impressed by their culture that instead of converting them, he got converted. He gave up his membership of the church and he now resolved that he will now fight for the tribal rights. So he became a strong advocate and a strong fighter for the rights of tribals henceforward. He even said, "Pen is the weapon with which I will fight for my tribals." So much so, when India got independence, our first Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru appointed Verrier Elwin as his tribal advisor. He was the tribal advisor to the Prime Minister, the first Prime Minister of India. So he's a selfless fighter for the rights of tribal people. That is the story of Verrier Elwin. So he is somebody who fell so much in love with the tribal culture and tribal life that he dedicated his entire life to fight for their rights and to work for their upliftment. So clear about Gonds? Any questions? Have you now got a picture of who are these Gonds, what is it about them? And next time when we discuss about Gonds, will you have this discussion and the video in your mind? Yes? Yes or no? Yes. Great. We will stop here. Next, tomorrow we will also discuss another tribe, another 1 or 2 tribes if possible. Since this is the first tribe, we took some time. Tomorrow we will try to cover 2 examples and we will continue again on Monday.